Okay, what's going on there?
I'm not sure. I'm a roommate. I have a feeling that something went on with him and his wife. I'm not sure.
Okay, you're not telling me anything. I don't understand what you're saying. Did somebody attack her?
I'm not sure. I don't know what happened.
She got stabbed by the face. It went through the chest.
On a daily basis, so I just don't understand why y'all think it's appropriate to tell me that I'm not allowed to have emotion. That's not fair. If it was your best friend, tell me you wouldn't be acting like this.
Can I tell you something without you talking?
Yes, you can tell me whatever you want.
Without you talking?
Yes, you can tell me whatever you need to.
Please.
She knew something was wrong. She could feel it in her chest, that tight electric sensation that tells your body to pay attention, to document, to leave a trail. So she pressed record. On the night of July 27th, 2019, a 32-year-old woman named Silvia Galva lay on a bed in an apartment in Tamarack, Florida, a quiet suburb tucked inside Broward County, and held her phone up in the dark. She was not filming a video for social media. She was not making a joke. She was recording a man she loved because some part of her understood that what was happening in that room was dangerous. Silvia had dark hair and a warm smile. She was a mother. She had a future she was planning for. She was not a statistic. She was not a cautionary tale. She was a person who woke up that morning thinking about ordinary things. By midnight, she was gone. Her killer stood over her body and called it an accident. He said she fell onto a decorative spear. He said he had been trying to push her out of bed, not hurt her. He said it was the worst mistake of his life. But Silvia had pressed record. And when investigators listened to what was on that phone, the story Adam Crespo told began to fall apart piece by piece, word by word, second by agonizing second. This is the story of what happened inside that apartment. This is the story of what the audio captured. And this is the story of how a jury, a courtroom, and the cold logic of forensic science answered the only question that mattered. Was this an accident, or was this murder? July in Broward County is relentless. The heat presses down on everything. The air is thick with humidity. Even after dark, the temperature barely breaks. People stay inside. They run the air conditioning. They try to decompress after long days. Tamarack is that kind of town. Quiet streets, apartment complexes with palm trees out front. A place where people go to build a life, not to make the news. Adam Crespo was 49 years old. He had lived in the area for years. By most outward appearances, he was an ordinary man, the kind of person you would pass at the grocery store and not remember. He worked, he had possessions, he had routines. Silvia Galva was 32. She had been in a relationship with Adam for some time. She was not from the same place. She carried her own history, her own dreams, her own reasons for being in that apartment on that particular night. Relationships between adults are complicated. There is always more beneath the surface than what strangers see. But what is known is this. By the night of July 27th, 2019, something had broken between them. It was not a small crack. It was not the kind of tension that resolves itself with a conversation in a night of sleep. It was the kind of breaking that fills a room with static where every word carries a charge, and even silence becomes a threat. Friends of Silvia later recalled that she had been going through a difficult period. She was navigating the uncertainty that comes with change. She had recently made decisions about her living situation. Her relationship with Adam was unstable. There were people in her life who were concerned. But on that evening from the outside, the apartment complex at Tamarack looked exactly the same as it did every other night. Nothing to suggest what was coming. Nobody on the street knew that inside one of those units, a woman had already picked up her phone and begun to record. Every catastrophe has a moment before it. A crossroads, a choice, a point where if things had gone differently, the story would have had a different ending. This was that moment. The argument had been building for a while. The details of what exactly triggered it that night are difficult to pin down with certainty. Relationships carry weight from all the days before every unresolved grievance, every harsh word, every moment someone stayed when they should have left. That weight had been accumulating between Adam and Silvia for some time. What we know is that by late evening, the conflict had escalated into something that Silvia felt the need to document. She picked up her phone, she opened the camera, and she began to record. This decision, quiet, instinctive, desperate, would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in a murder investigation. On that recording, Adam Crespo can be heard demanding that Silvia leave the apartment. His voice is insistent, pressuring. He wants her gone. Silvia pushes back. The exchange grows more intense. The words become more threatening. There is a back and forth quality to it, both of them daring the other, both of them drawing lines in the dark. And then Adam Crespo says something that no person in a healthy disagreement should ever say. He threatens to shoot her. That word shoot lands in the recording like a stone dropped in still water. And the ripples do not stop. At some point during this exchange, a friend of Silvia's became aware that something was wrong. Either through a text message, a phone call, or some other form of contact, this friend understood that the situation was dangerous. That friend called 911. That call was the moment this story stopped being a private argument and became a matter of public record. But by the time the dispatcher answered, the crisis inside that apartment had already moved beyond words. What happened next took only seconds. That is the terrifying truth about moments like this. The entire trajectory of a life of two lives can change in the time it takes to draw a breath. Silvia was in the bedroom. According to the account Adam Crespo later gave police, he was trying to remove her from the apartment. She refused to leave. She stayed in the bed. He approached her, he grabbed her, he attempted to pull her off the mattress. That is the version Adam told. Now here is the detail that changes everything. At the head of the bed, mounted decorative, clearly visible, was a spear, a long ornamental weapon. The kind of item that some people keep as art, as a conversation piece, as decor, that speaks to a certain aesthetic. Adam Crespo had this spear in his home. He also had, as investigators would later discover, an enormous collection of other weapons. But on that night in that bedroom, the spear at the head of the bed was the object that mattered. According to Adam's account, as he pulled Silvia from the bed, she fell or was pulled in such a way that her body made contact with the spear. The tip of the weapon entered her chest. The wound was catastrophic. Silvia Galva fell to the floor. The wound was described as a penetrating injury to the chest. Deep, fatal. She did not get up. Whatever argument had been happening moments before, whatever words had been exchanged, whatever threats had been made, it all stopped. The apartment went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something irreversible has happened. Adam Crespo stood in that bedroom with the body of the woman he claimed to love at his feet. And the first call he had to make was to explain what the world was about to see. When officers arrived, they found chaos. The 911 call from Silvia's friend had brought them there. Law enforcement in Broward County responded quickly. When they entered the apartment, what they encountered was a scene that immediately demanded explanation. Silvia Galva was on the floor of the bedroom. She was not moving. Emergency medical personnel were called. Attempts were made to save her. She was pronounced dead. Adam Crespo was present at the scene. He was not hiding. He was not running. He stood in that apartment and faced the officers who arrived, and he immediately began telling them what had happened. It was an accident. Those 3 words, that is what he offered. It was a horrible, terrible, tragic accident. He had been trying to get her out of the apartment. She would not leave. He grabbed her. She fell. The spear was there. He never meant for this to happen. His demeanor was noted by first responders. He appeared distressed. He appeared shaken. To a casual observer, he might have looked like a man in shock, someone who had just witnessed something unimaginable. But law enforcement officers are trained to look past the surface. They looked at the room. They looked at the body. They looked at the angle of the wound. They looked at the position of the spear. They took photographs. They made measurements. They bagged evidence. They noted every item in that apartment. And then they found the weapons. Not 1 or 2. Not a small personal collection. An enormous inventory of weapons, firearms, blades, and other instruments stored throughout the residence. The scale of it was significant enough to become part of the official record. This was not just a man who had a decorative spear on his wall. This was a man with an arsenal. That detail would matter later. For now, Adam Crespo was taken in for questioning. The interrogation room was waiting. There is something uniquely revealing about interrogation rooms. They are designed to be stripped of comfort. Fluorescent light, hard chairs, a table between the investigator and the suspect. No distractions, no escape routes, just words in the silence between them. When Adam Crespo sat down across from detectives from the Broward County Sheriff's Office, he had already committed to his story. The accident, the struggle, the horrible coincidence of a decorative weapon being in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong moment. He told it calmly. He told it in detail. He described the argument. He described Silvia's refusal to leave. He described his frustration. He described making the decision to physically remove her from the bed. He described grabbing her. He described the motion. He described hearing something, a sound, a gasp, and then looking down and seeing her on the floor. He described terror, grief, disbelief. The detectives listened. They asked questions in the careful, methodical way that experienced investigators do. They did not rush. They did not challenge him aggressively in those early moments. They let him build his version of events because a story built quickly under pressure often contains its own contradictions, gaps that widen under scrutiny. They asked about the spear, where it was positioned, how it was mounted, what angle it was at. They asked about the wound, where it was located on Silvia's body, how deep it went. They asked about the motion he made when he pulled her, whether he was pulling straight out from the bed or at an angle, whether she resisted, whether she fell forward or backward. Adam answered, and the detectives wrote everything down. Because in the room next door, forensic experts were already beginning the work that would determine whether the story Adam Crespo was telling was physically possible. The answer would not come that night, but it was coming. Adam Crespo did not deny being in the room when Silvia died. That much he admitted freely. He did not construct an alibi. He did not claim to have been somewhere else. He said he was there. He said he was the one who had made contact with her body. He said his hands were the last hands on her before she fell. What he denied was intent. Intent is the dividing line between accident and crime. It is the word that separates a tragedy from a murder. And it is extraordinarily difficult to prove because intent lives inside a person's mind, invisible to cameras and recordings and forensic analysis. Or so Adam believed. What Adam did not know, not at first, was that Silvia had been recording. The audio on her phone was retrieved by investigators, and when they listened to it, they heard the conversation that had taken place in that apartment in the hour or hours before her death. They heard the argument. They heard Adam demanding she leave. They heard Silvia refusing. They heard the escalation, the pushing, the challenging, the anger that built and built until it became something unbearable. And they heard Adam Crespo threaten to shoot her. That threat, those words on that recording, changed everything about how investigators interpreted what followed. Because here is what the recording told them. This was not a sudden, spontaneous moment of chaos. This was the endpoint of a sustained, escalating confrontation. This was a man who had made a threat involving a weapon before his partner ended up dead from a wound caused by a weapon. The recording also raised a more fundamental question. If this was a man trying to remove someone from an apartment, frustrating perhaps, but legally motivated, then why had he threatened to shoot her rather than simply call police himself? Why had the confrontation become so physically volatile? Why was a 32-year-old woman so frightened by the dynamic in that room that she had activated a recording device before anything physical occurred? These were the questions that investigators brought into the forensic phase of their work. And the forensic phase was about to make the accident theory look very, very fragile. Forensic investigation is patient work. It does not rush. It measures. It documents. It asks, can what this person claims to have happened actually have happened? And it demands that the physical evidence answer. In the case of Silvia Galva, the central question was simple to state and complex to answer. Could a person fall onto that spear at that angle in that position and sustain the wound that Silvia sustained? To answer that question, investigators from the Broward County Sheriff's Office conducted what is known as a crime scene reconstruction. They returned to the apartment. They analyzed the position of the spear and its mounting point at the head of the bed. They examined the wound track, the path the weapon had taken through Silvia's body in conjunction with the medical examiner's findings. Then they attempted to physically replicate the scenario Adam had described. The results were unambiguous. The angle of the wound was not consistent with the motion Adam had described. The force required to produce the kind of penetrating chest wound that killed Silvia was not consistent with accidental contact during a struggle to remove someone from a bed. In other words, the physics did not work. For the spear to have entered Silvia's body in the way, and at the angle that it did, the motion would have had to be deliberately directed, not incidental, not the result of a fall, directed. The medical examiner's findings supported this conclusion. The depth of the wound, the trajectory, the force required, all of it pointed towards something intentional. Now add the audio recording. Now add the weapons cache. Now add the threat made minutes or hours before Silvia died. The picture that emerged from this investigation was not of a terrible accident. It was of a confrontation that had been escalating toward violence and then became violence. Detectives presented this evidence to the state attorney's office. Adam Crespo was charged with second-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty. His defense team had work to do. But so did the prosecution, and the prosecution had Silvia's phone. Legal proceedings are slow by design. The case moved through the Broward County court system over the months and years that followed the night of July 27, 2019. There were pre-trial hearings, there were motions, there were delays of the kind that are common in serious criminal cases. The wheels of justice, as they say, turned deliberately. Adam Crespo initially maintained his not guilty plea. His defense argued the accident theory. They pointed to the complexity of the physical evidence. They suggested that the forensic conclusions were not as clear-cut as the prosecution claimed. They challenged the interpretation of the audio recording. They argued that the threatening language on that recording was the kind of heated language that people use in arguments language that does not necessarily translate into literal intent. It was a coherent defense. There are always arguments to be made when the critical event took place in a private room with no eyewitnesses. Physical evidence can be interpreted in more than one way. Forensic reconstruction is not infallible. But as the case developed, as the prosecution laid out the totality of the evidence, as the audio was played in legal proceedings, as the forensic findings regarding the angle and force of the wound were presented, something shifted. Adam Crespo changed his plea. He did not plead guilty to second-degree murder. He entered a plea of no contest, which in the American legal system means that a defendant does not admit guilt, but also does not dispute the charges sufficient to contest them at trial. The practical effect is the same as a guilty plea for sentencing purposes. Adam Crespo was convicted of second-degree murder in the death of Silvia Galva. He was sentenced to life in prison. No possibility of parole in the immediate term. He would spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. There were no other defendants charged in connection with Silvia's death. Adam Crespo acted alone in that apartment. He was the only person accountable for what happened in that bedroom. And the sentence handed down by the court reflected the gravity of what had been lost. A life, 32 years old, gone. For what? For an argument that should never have reached that point. Let us go back to that interrogation room, because there is something in the footage and the recordings from those sessions that goes beyond what was said. Something in the way Adam Crespo presented himself, the language he chose, the emotional register he operated, in the details he volunteered, in the details he avoided, that speaks to the psychology of a person in his position. People who have committed acts of violence and are now constructing a narrative of innocence share certain behavioral tendencies. Forensic psychologists and law enforcement professionals have documented these patterns extensively. Understanding them does not replace evidence, but it provides a frame for reading what investigators observed. First, the preemptive claim of grief. Adam Crespo moved quickly to establish his emotional devastation. He presented as a man overwhelmed by what had happened. This is not unusual for people who are guilty, not because they are faking their emotions, but because the reality of a situation can produce genuine panic and distress, even in people who cause that situation. However, the specific shape of that distress matters. A person who accidentally caused the death of someone they love tends to be consumed by a self-recrimination. They ask what they could have done differently. They return to the moment obsessively. Their grief is porous, open, non-defensive. A person who is protecting a false narrative tends to have grief that is performative, that is deployed at strategic moments, and that coexists with a suspicious clarity about the details of their account. Second, the mechanical precision of the story. When Adam described what happened in the bedroom, there was a specificity to his account that law enforcement noted. He knew exactly what motion he had made. He knew exactly what direction Silvia had fallen. He knew exactly what the sequence of events had been. In genuine accidents, particularly ones occurring under conditions of extreme emotional stress, memory is typically fragmented. People remember some things with vividness and cannot account for others at all. The coherent, sequential, almost rehearsed quality of a narrative told in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic event can itself be a signal that the narrative was constructed rather than recalled. Third, the escalation on the recording. One of the most psychologically revealing aspects of this case is not what Adam said to investigators. It is what he said to Silvia on that recording. The threat to shoot her. Threats involving weapons do not emerge randomly from the air. They emerge from a mindset in which the person making the threat has, on some level, connected the idea of violence with the idea of this specific conflict with this specific person. The fact that Adam Crespo's mind went to a firearm during a verbal argument and that he expressed that threat out loud suggests a pattern of thinking about control and power through the lens of physical force. This is not a clinical diagnosis. It is an observation about the landscape of that conversation. Fourth, the weapon itself. Adam Crespo chose to keep an enormous collection of weapons in his home. This alone is not evidence of wrongdoing. Many people legally collect weapons. But the presence of that spear at the head of the bed where his partner slept raises questions that were inevitably considered in the context of the investigation. Was this decorative? Almost certainly. Did it create a danger? Clearly, yes. Was its position relevant to the outcome of the events on July 27, 2019? The court decided that it was. What the psychology of this case ultimately reveals is a portrait of control. A man who wanted a woman to leave and was willing to escalate verbally, physically, fatally when she did not comply. A man who, when faced with the consequences of his escalation, attempted to reframe the narrative as something that had been done to him, an accident that had victimized him through its horror, rather than something he had done. It did not work because Silvia had pressed record. It is easy in the architecture of a true crime story to lose the victim. The investigation becomes the focus. The forensic evidence, the interrogation footage, the legal maneuvering, the verdict. And somewhere in all of that, the person who actually died gets reduced to a name, a body, a set of facts. Silvia Galva deserves more than that. She was 32 years old when she died. 32. That is young enough to have entire chapters of life still unwritten. Young enough to change direction, to move somewhere new, to discover things about yourself that you did not know at 25 or 28. Young enough that the people who loved her are still years later carrying the particular weight of a grief that asks what could have been. She was a mother. That fact, simple as it sounds, carries enormous weight. There was a child in the world whose life was permanently altered by what happened in that apartment on a July night in Florida. A child who had to grow up understanding that their mother was gone, not from illness, not from accident, but from violence. From the hands of someone who claimed to love her. Silvia was not a woman without agency. She made the decision to press record. She made the decision to document what was happening to her. That choice, made in a moment of danger with fear pressing in from every side, speaks to the kind of person she was. Aware, resourceful, not passive in the face of a threat. She tried to protect herself. She left evidence. She left a record. She left a voice, her own voice, and the voice of her killer that would eventually speak in a courtroom on her behalf. People who knew Silvia described her in the ways that people describe someone whose absence leaves a specific shaped hole. Not a general sadness, but a particular missing. A laugh that is no longer in the room. A perspective that is no longer part of the conversation. A presence that cannot be replaced because it was singular. She had plans. People who are 32 years old and involved in complicated situations do not stop having plans. They still think about tomorrow. They still imagine a version of the future that looks different from the present. Silvia was no exception. She was navigating a difficult period, as all of us navigate difficult periods, with the assumption that she would come out the other side. She did not get that chance. Her death was not deserved. It was not the result of a bad choice she made. It was not her fault. It was not a consequence she had earned through any behavior or decision. It was something done to her by someone who had no right to do it. She did not die because she refused to leave an apartment. She died because a man decided that her refusal was something he was willing to turn violent over. Silvia Galva, mother, daughter, friend, 32 years old. She pressed record, and the world heard her. Cases like this one do not exist in isolation. They are the visible edge of something vast and largely hidden. Domestic violence, the sustained pattern of coercive control, emotional abuse, physical intimidation, and escalating danger that characterizes abusive relationships is not rare. It is not confined to particular demographics, income levels, or geographies. It happens in apartments in quiet Florida suburbs. It happens in houses with manicured lawns. It happens behind closed doors and in the company of people who are skilled at presenting one face to the world and another to the person they have trapped inside their life. The statistics are numbers, and numbers by themselves do not communicate the human experience of what those numbers represent. So instead, let us talk about patterns. The first pattern this case illustrates is the escalation curve. Domestic violence almost never begins with catastrophic violence. It builds. It starts with control, small acts of dominance that establish who has power in the relationship. Then it escalates. Verbal aggression, threats, physical contact that is explained away or minimized. Each escalation resets the baseline. What was once intolerable becomes normalized. And then the next step up the curve becomes possible. On the night Silvia died, Adam Crespo threatened to shoot her before he killed her. That threat was not the beginning of his dangerous behavior. It was a point on a line that had been trending in one direction for a long time. The second pattern is the danger of the exit point. Research consistently shows that the period when a victim attempts to leave an abusive relationship or when the relationship is breaking down is often the most dangerous moment. Abusers do not respond to loss of control with reason. They respond with escalation. The demand that Silvia leave the apartment, the refusal to accept her presence on her own terms, the physical confrontation that followed all of this occurred at what appears to have been a breaking point in the relationship. Silvia did not leave on her own terms. She was not given that option. The third pattern is the role of technology. This case would have looked very different without the audio recording on Silvia's phone. Without that recording, it would have been Adam's account of an accident against forensic evidence that pointed toward intentional force. The forensic evidence was compelling, but forensic evidence can be argued over, interpreted, disputed. The audio recording stripped away the context that Adam was trying to construct. It replaced his narrative with reality. It gave investigators a window into the minutes before Silvia's death that no amount of forensic reconstruction could fully provide. We live in a world where almost everyone carries a device capable of capturing audio and video. That capability has become, in the most tragic of circumstances, a form of self-documentation that can serve justice even when it cannot prevent harm. Silvia instinctively understood this. She used the tools she had available. The fourth pattern is the question of intervention. A friend made a 911 call that night. That friend knew something was wrong. That friend took action. But let us sit with the harder question. Were there moments before that night when someone close to Silvia or close to Adam might have seen the warning signs? Were there moments when a conversation, a resource, an intervention might have broken the escalation curve before it reached its endpoint? This is not about assigning blame to bystanders. It is about asking what systems and supports need to exist for people inside dangerous relationships to find a way out before the danger becomes lethal. Hotlines exist. Shelters exist. Legal protections exist. They are imperfect. They are underfunded. They do not always work, but they exist. And they are staffed by people who understand the complexity of leaving, who understand that leaving is not simple, that it is not safe, that it requires planning and support and resources that not everyone has access to. The lesson from this case is not that Silvia should have done something differently. The lesson is that we as a society need to do better at building the scaffolding that might catch people before they reach the moment Silvia reached on July 27th, 2019. One more thing, the weapons. Adam Crespo had a massive collection of weapons in his home. He had a partner he argued violently with. He had the temperament to threaten to shoot someone during a dispute. And yet, until the night Silvia died, no one had removed those weapons from that environment. That is a conversation worth having. In homes where domestic violence is present, the presence of firearms and other weapons dramatically increases the risk of lethal outcomes. This is not opinion. It is documented in research conducted across decades and across multiple countries. A weapon in an environment of domestic violence is not a neutral object. It is a potential instrument of the worst possible outcome. Silvia Galva did not die from a firearm. She died from a spear that Adam kept at the head of his bed. But the principle holds. Weapons and domestic violence are a lethal combination. This is the conversation her death demands we have. Adam Crespo is in prison. He will likely die there. The sentence handed down by the court is final. The legal case is closed. The verdict is recorded in the files of the Broward County judicial system, alongside the photographs, the forensic reports, the audio recording, and the name of the woman who was killed. But cases do not close in the lives of the people who loved the person who was lost. For Silvia's child, for her family, for her friends, the case never fully closes. It becomes a permanent part of the landscape of their lives. A wound that heals over but never fully disappears. A name that comes up on anniversaries, on birthdays, in quiet moments when the world suddenly reminds you of who is no longer in it. And for the rest of us, the people who follow these cases, who watch these documentaries, who are drawn to these stories for reasons we do not always fully understand, there is a question worth sitting with. Why do we watch? Part of it is curiosity. Part of it is the human instinct to understand how things go wrong. Part of it is the hope that understanding will somehow protect us, that if we know the warning signs, we will be able to see them coming, that we will be safe. But there is another reason, and it may be the most important one. We watch because every case like this one contains a person who deserves to be remembered. Not as a victim, not as a cautionary tale, not as a data point in a domestic violence report. As a person, Silvia Galva pressed record on her phone in the middle of a dangerous night because she wanted there to be a record. She wanted something to survive what was happening to her. Whether she knew it consciously or not, she left something behind that outlasted the night. Something that told the truth when the man who killed her was trying to tell a lie. She gave investigators what they needed. She gave the court what it needed. She cannot give us back the years she was owed, but she gave us her voice, and that voice is worth listening to. If you are in a relationship where someone has threatened you, physically intimidated you, controlled your movements, isolated you from people who care about you, that situation is not normal. It is not something you need to manage alone. Resources exist. People exist who understand what you are going through and can help you find a way forward. In the United States, the National Domestic Violence Hotline can be reached at 1-800-799-7233, or you can text START to 88788. In other countries, similar resources exist. Look them up, share them, know them before you need them. Silvia Galva was 32 years old. She deserved to grow old. She deserved to see her child grow up. She deserved tomorrow. Remember her name.